Hey everybody, Plushie here, and today we're going to talk about the New Year's servant for the year of 2025, Richard I. He is, of course, one of the main characters of Fate Strange Fake, and it was kind of obvious that he was going to be picked since they played the first episode of the anime with the Japanese voice acting during the New Year stream, and also, of course, we'll be getting more episodes this year. And even potentially we could get a collab following his debut, since last year we got Takeru and then a collab following immediately after, right? But yeah, all of that is very exciting, but Richard's kit at first glance looks a little bit tame compared to some of the other recent SSRs, so people didn't really pay much attention to it, but I do think he has some real potential just as a very solid saber. So yeah, without further ado, let's get into today's hot take on Richard. So taking a look at his base stats, he has pretty respectable attack. Usually sabers have really good stats, so this isn't even like the highest attacking saber, but this is a pretty high attack stat. It's really nice. He, of course, also has really nice base gain, 0.56% per hit on a 4-hit arts card, 5-hit quick cards, and 5-hit extra attacks. So these cards are going to be generating a decent amount of MP and also making a lot of stars, which both would be helped even further when we take a look at his skill set in just a bit. He doesn't really have any interesting traits. Quite unfortunately, he is not an animal characteristic servant in his third ascension, despite having like a giant lion head. So he doesn't have synergy with Koenskaya, and he also has a double quick, double buster deck, which is quite unusual actually for a lot of these AOE Buster Sabers. This is more of a Lancer deck, as people like to call it, but quite nice considering he is a very crit heavy servant, and having 2 quick cards allow him to generate quite a bit of stars. Richard's first skill gives the entire party a 3-turn 20% attack up, MP generation up, and star generation up. It also gives him an on-attack activating effect for 3 turns that will allow him to gain 30% star generation rate up for 3 turns whenever he attacks, of course. And this triggers before the attack actually lands, and it also works on his MP. And this skill has a 6-turn cooldown. So this is a very solid offensive skill. Personally, I would have liked if the party-wide effects were just for himself and with a slightly higher number, but even at 20%, it's a really good skill just for himself. The attack up, obviously, always going to be useful and universal. MP generation up actually allows his already really decent base gain, as we've seen earlier, to be even higher. So he can spam his MP quite easily if he gets to pick his quick and arts cards. And the star generation up, comboed with the on-attack effect, allows him to go crazy with the star gain boost. Like with a single Brave Chain after activating the skill, he would be at 150% star generation boost at the end of it. But at the same time, star generation caps at 3 stars per hit, so even if you get to use your Brave Chain for 3 turns in a row and you get to like almost 400% star generation up, it doesn't really help beyond a certain point. A cool thing that you can do though is you can sort of accumulate this for a little bit and then use his AOE Buster MP, and it's going to generate close to quick AOE MP's levels of stars. And he is a crit servant, as we'll see later, so this star generation, even though a bit overkill a lot of the times, is still very much appreciated. And not to mention, even just on turn 1, if you immediately use this and then use his MP is going to have 50% star generation boost, right? So overall, a really solid skill. Like, once again, I really wouldn't use him as a support or even a hybrid DPS. I would just focus all on him. The mix of effects are really nice still. His second skill is a 3-turn 20% rainbow buff to self, as well as a 3-turn 30% MP damage up to self, and he has a targetable cooldown reduction by a turn, and this is also on a 6-turn cooldown. So realistically, all of his skill cooldowns can be treated as if it was 1 less, because he could always just use this on himself. The rainbow buff is nice. It gives him Yui synergy, even though I don't really see him being paired with Yui that much. But more importantly, he's actually a servant that I think enjoys picking all of his cards, because of that first skill, his quick and arts cards have really good MP gain as well as really good star generation. So you really want to pick his Mighty Chains a lot instead of just focusing on his Buster cards. MP damage up, of course, helps his looping damage and helps his MP damage in general. And the cooldown reduction being the only targetable effect on the skill can be treated as good or bad. If this entire skill was targetable, combined with that first skill, I could see him be a support, especially for min turning, where he just uses his skills and you kill him off. But this way, he can actually reduce the cooldown of his supports, which will probably have more valuable skills than he does, while not losing on any of the buffs on himself. Unfortunately, with the combination of a Pen 5, this doesn't really help him in loop farming in terms of double Koyanskaya of Light, because cutting the cooldown to 4 really doesn't do anything. However, this does allow single Koyanskaya of Light in certain weird setups, we will get into just in a bit. So overall, really solid skill. Richard's third skill is a 30 MP battery, a 3-turn 500% Buster Star Absorb Up, and a 3-turn 50% Buster Crit Up, and a 20 Star Bomb on a 6-turn cooldown. So the battery, of course, allows him to Buster Loop like a normal AOE Buster unit, so that's always nice. But the skill is more focused on the crit aspect, I'd say. It has basically everything you want in a crit skill other than star per turn, but because he generates so much stars with the help of his skill 1, I don't really think that's a problem. So the 20 Star Bomb is a decent amount of stars. Combined with the Star Absorb Up and the Buster Crit Up, he could just, get really good Buster card damage just from this one skill. And even though on paper this might look a little bit lame because it's not all damage crit up, but you'll see later when seeing his MP why this kind of makes sense. Specifically, the Star Absorb Up being on Buster means that even if he has a lot of his cards, the stars would still concentrate onto his Buster. This could be good or bad sometimes. Sometimes you want his arts to crit for MP generation and it would just go all onto his Buster, but other times this would guarantee him to do really big Buster crit damage. And this can potentially affect farming styles such as the BBCL card lock combo, because you would have his entire hand obviously. So yeah, do take note of that. His passives are really tame. He has Magic Resistance B, which is 17.5% debuff resist, and he has Writing A, which is 10% quick up. And he has 2 quick cards that are already pretty decent, so it's not bad, but at the same time, it's nothing exciting. And finally, his MP is an AOE 5-hit Buster MP that increases his own critical damage by 50% for 3 turns, burns all enemies with 2000 damage for 5 turns, and its overcharge effect is a rainbow card resistance down for 3 turns that triggers unfortunately after the MP does damage, and it scales from 10% all the way up to 30%. So the MP makes a decent amount of stars, and when combined with his first skill, especially after a couple of ramp ups, makes a crap ton of stars. And the most important effect of the MP is obviously the 50% crit up whenever he uses it. This is really, really strong. We have characters like Achilles or Bima do something like this as well, but a lot of other crit ramp up servants like Summer Melusine or Takasugi, they only have 30%. And Richard's entire kit, as we've seen earlier, is also built around just giving him more stars and giving him guaranteed crits on his Buster, and just generating a lot of stars and MP because of that MP generation boost and the rainbow buff. So if he can spam this with like Mighty Chains, he would be critting just one of the hardest critters in the entire game, I should say. The rest of the MP is not really exciting. The burn, I guess, triggers Honey Lake, but he certainly isn't a good fit into burn teams. And the rainbow resist down isn't even before damage, so it's kind of unfortunate. But in a challenge quest, if he can spam his MP, this is a small, damage boost as well as MP generation boost. The star gen boost from the quick down, I don't really think it's super relevant, but I think the arts down is actually low-key the most important one. But overall, the MP is not super exciting outside of the 50% crit ramp up. He's almost like a single target servant that uses the MP to increase his single target damage even further and also kill some trash mobs that have really low HP. But I guess don't be deceived, because his MP looping damage is not low at all, as we'll see in just a bit, because of how his skills synergizes very well with Oberon. So how do I feel about Richard? Well, in terms of farming, surprisingly his Buster looping damage is pretty decent. Initially, I didn't expect him to be like really good at it, since people really like gassing up Artoria and Mordred's performance, since of course they have the ability to use Rising Mud Rain. But of course, in a standard event, usually with 50 MP starting charge CE, they should be at a relatively similar level. So as you can see here, this list is assuming all of them are at MP2. They're using a MLB level 100 cranking, and Richard's damage is the scale, and red numbers are lower than Richard's damage at each given wave, and green numbers mean that it is higher than Richard at each given wave. So as you can see here, he's beating most AOE Buster Saber loopers. Surprisingly, both Artoria and Mordred can't really catch up to his damage, despite their upgraded MP. And I suppose the biggest factor is that he has really good steroids that he could double cast immediately by turn 2, and he has an MP damage up, especially on his skill 2, just like Altera, who is the only servant who actually out damages him in Buster Looping. And with Oberon, that is of course a huge boost if you get to double cast it on turn 3, right? Even someone like Ibuki, who is a 50 charger, so she has the ability to use Oberon's skill 1 on turn 2 instead of turn 3, her damage is still really not as good as Richard. With all that being said though, Richard has just similar damage still. It's not like he is leaps and bounds ahead of his other competition, and a lot of people might already have these servants at higher MP levels, so it's not like you should expect much if you want to roll for him specifically to be a Buster Looping Saber. The one thing I can give him on top of that is, of course, he doesn't need a Pen 5 to be effective, because all of his skills are effectively cooldown 5. So all he needs is a maxed out Pen 2, and he would be able to Buster Loop optimally. But of course, Artoria and Mordred both have the ability to use an MLB Rising Mud Rain, so I did have the numbers here as well for that, and he obviously can't no longer compete with them because Rising Mud Rain is such a powerful CE for Buster Looping. And of course, his cards hits extremely hard, especially on turn 3, because by that time he would have used his MP 3 times already, and that would be 150% generic crits and 250% Buster crits specifically. If you get his card, you can use him even at lower MP levels just to kill the big target quite easily. Of course, single core Buster Looping is no longer the end-all be-all farming type, even if the event has a 50 MP starting charge CE, because a lot of the times you simply need a single target to deal with early wave high HP targets. So multi-core is a very popular way to farm, and Richard essentially has the same amount of multi-core support as most of these other characters because he has a charisma. The MP gain boost doesn't really help in most situations, nor does the star generation boost, but at the very least he has a cooldown reduction that's targetable, so you could either use him with someone who with a really short cooldown like Tiamat, and immediately reactivate her skill 3, for example, or someone like Tonalico, who needs cooldown reduction or overcharge in order to trigger her skill 3. But once again, in multi-core, very often you are pairing AoEs with single targets, and I can't really think of a single target that really wants cooldown reduction as a supportive effect, so his multi-core performance is not going to be all that great either. But finally, in terms of his farming, I want to bring up a style of farming. It is the BBCL card lock farming. And of course, the basic gist of how you farm with that is you have a meta support, CL and Summer BB in your front line, and your actual DPS in the back line. And you use CL's skill 3 to turn your hand into all of her cards, and you swap her out, of course, and then you lock the cards, and then you get to use like Brave Chains every single turn, and usually you try to do MP Brave Chain and then try to get your MP back with the help of face cards, and then continue spamming your MP. I did criticize this BBCL farming comp in my review for CL, so if you want more details you can check that video out, but essentially I feel like that style of farming only fits quick servants at the end of the day, because quick has base refund on their MP, but more importantly, their supports buff their quick cards, which does damage as well as generate MP and also generate stars for your critical attacks for following turns. When Buster Servants are usually stuck between choosing whether to do a Mighty Chain and get their MP back up but not do good damage, or to choose a Buster Chain to do good damage but not get their MP for the next turn. Richard, however, can kind of do both at the same time because he functions a lot like a quick servant. His first skill gives him insane amounts of star generation, so he can probably supply his entire hand with almost guaranteed crits. That is very important because most prominent Buster meta supports like Koyan Light and Summer Scotty both have Buster Star Absorb Up specifically, so it would draw the stars away from your quick and arts cards in normal circumstances. But of course, if you make enough stars, it really wouldn't matter. Richard also has really good card gains because he already has really decent base gains, but also his first skill boosts it even further. And Richard can spam his MP to increase his critical damage. So it's not just that his Buster card does damage, his quick and arts cards also do damage, unlike most other Buster AoEs. Of course, they still do a lot less damage than his Buster cards, but at the very least, they do have the capacity to maybe kill a lower HP target. And finally, Richard has really short cooldowns, so you don't really feel like the Koyan Skya of Light cooldown reduction is wasted if you have Richard's Append 5 at max for this kind of farming, because even if you only are bringing one Koyan Light, Richard will be able to double cast his skills by turn 3. In order to MP again on turn 3, he just has to get his MP back to 70 on turn 2, which is quite easy even with a MPBA chain because of how good his base gain actually is. So overall, Richard fits into this specific farming style very much, but it's not like it's going to allow him to farm absolutely everything because the weakness of this farming style still exists. It doesn't really work in every kind of node composition. Namely, nodes with a very low HP wave 1. Your MP would just wipe all them out without giving you a chance to use your face cards to do anything, so you won't be able to do anything on turn 2. In terms of challenge quests, Richard is perhaps one of the most explosive crit DPSs in the entire game. The main contributor is of course that 3-turn 50% crit boost from his MP, which he can spam quite easily if he gets his quick and arts cards. The MP also has a ramp up rainbow effectiveness down, which of course boosts all of his cards damage, and also it of course increases the MP generation from both his quick and arts cards. His skill set also plays perfectly into his MP spamming crit damage dealing playstyle. His first skill effectively gives him infinite amount of star generation because of that flat 20% star gen, as well as the on attack 30% star generation effect. The MP generation boost from his skill 1 also helps with, of course, him spamming his MP, and that skill 3 from him is also a really nice bread and butter crit skill, giving him immediate access to crit damage on his Buster cards even before he starts spamming his MP. The cooldown reduction allows him to have extremely short cooldowns, effectively 4-turn cooldowns for the first cycle if you have his Append 5 at max, so you can do something really fun like using him with double Koyan Light and double casting all of his skills immediately and just start going ham. Richard almost feels like an honorary single target, considering he basically focuses solely on boosting his critical damage, and his MP damage, while not being too shabby, is just really not the main focus. It's usually used as a tool to generate stars, as well as giving him more crit steroids. Richard also has 0 form of survival or sustain in his kit, so he is a super glass cannon that tries to kill everything before they get to kill him, which once again, his short cooldowns and his explosive nature really helps him with doing that job. Because Richard is a super crit focused DPS, his performance will fluctuate greatly depending on your card draw RNG. And Richard in particular is a servant that relies on their MP to get their crit damage up, but also solely relies on face cards to regenerate his MP, since the MP itself is Buster and has no refund. So Richard, in my opinion, is one of the most Brave Chain hungry servants in the entire game if you want him to have optimal performance. And unless you build a basically min-turn team where you get your supports killed every now and then to reshuffle your hand, you would have to include these card shuffle supports that we have in the game. We have Ruler Artoria, who can now give you a better odd of getting your DPS's cards, as well as have really good party buffs. 40% attack up and 50% crit up is nothing to scoff at. It's like better than Waver almost in terms of offense. Ruler Artoria can only reshuffle your hand once and it would be down for a very long time. We of course also have Hakuno, who can repeatedly reshuffle your hand every single turn until you get the correct one every single turn and do a Brave Chain. But Hakuno is kind of dead weight on the field outside of her ability to reshuffle your hand, and you also have to feed her charge in order to allow her to continuously reroll your hand. You can also still get very unlucky and just not get your hand after like 5 or 6 rerolls. You have to like decide when to cut your losses and use a suboptimal hand. We of course also have Summer BB, who can card lock, but at the same time it's also kind of like the Ruler Artoria problem, where it's a really long cooldown skill and Richard probably wouldn't last until the second activation. And also you would have to wait for a perfect hand at least once before you can lock it, and it's very easy to break that card lock if you're forced to switch someone out or someone on your front line got killed. My point being, these card shuffle supports aren't servants that you necessarily want to run normally in your party unless you have a very specific game plan, but unfortunately for Richard, these might just be the best choices to maximize his performance. With all that being said, of course, I'm not saying Richard can't be used just as a normal Buster AoE. He's still very good at it. His MP provides a large chunk of his total damage, so even when he has his skills on cooldown, short as they may be, he still has a source of damage steroids, and his cooldown reduction in a challenge quest can easily be used on another support that can potentially provide him with even more value with their super powerful skills, such as Merlin being a prime target for that skill too. But once again, all I'm trying to say is if you want to achieve or replicate the crazy super explosive damage that you might see in videos where people are using Richard, you would have to go with the card shuffle or the min-turn approach. In conclusion, Richard is an extremely solid SSR. You can even argue he is one of the strongest AOE Buster Looping Sabers in the game. His Buster Looping damage is surprisingly competent even amongst his other peers that have MP upgrades, and he also fits pretty well into the BBCL card lock farming comp that relies more so on crit damage and face card gains. In challenge quests, he is an extremely explosive crit DPS who has an entire skill set that supports his already decent base gains and give him immense amounts of star generation and MP spam. And of course, when he gets to spam his MP, his crit damage goes through the roof. In order to hit the ceiling of his performance though, it is kind of required for you to build a super aggro team and also rely a little bit on card RNG. So if you are just using him normally, he might feel a little bit too plain and vanilla compared to some other modern AoE busters, but of course, being vanilla doesn't really mean you are bad. Richard, in my opinion, is a little bit underrated because of that fact, and I can guarantee you that he is a really solid performer if you just, build your team correctly. Anyways, hope you guys enjoyed the video, and Happy New Year's, and I'll see you guys in the next one.